Well, good morning. Morning. Thank you for coming out to Busy Bee today to learn about protecting your plants from cold. Let's hope that doesn't need to be an issue, but it might. I think I'm maybe uniquely qualified to talk about cold because I grew up in Buffalo, New York.
Oh, wonderful.
So we knew what that was. I didn't know what the tropics were till we got married and moved down here because we liked the weather. For 20 years, I managed nurseries, and we firsthand had to deal with the cold. My first winter here in 1984, Christmas Eve, the temperature dropped to 28 degrees for 8 hours, and that was down in Jupiter. And I spent Christmas Eve night at the nursery making sure the smudge pots were working and the heat. And I remember leaving Christmas morning and I had to put water on the lock to unlock to get out because it got so cold. And 28 degrees down there was very devastating. So we learned a lot of lessons that day and the weeks that came across that. But here in Florida, we enjoy this beautiful weather that we have year-round. But yet the winter temperatures can be low enough sometimes to cause injury to plants. We have subtropical, tropical, and occasional temperate plants that are not adapted to this climate. Mostly you'll find North and Central Florida will be the freezing temperatures. My wife and I were in Gainesville for Christmas last year, and it went down to 22 degrees up there. And that had been our first experience of that temperature in a very long time. Had to wear long pants. Don't normally do that, but now, subtropical plants here can become acclimated enough that they will survive plants as the temperatures go along. But how the cold affects plants is two things. The ability of plants to survive depends on two factors. One is temperature fluctuations. And what I mean by that is we have continual drop in temperatures as we come towards, and generally you're going to see January, February as the months that are going to be a problem. So far this year we've been in the 60s at night quite a bit. We've had some 50s. We had one night that was 48, and that helps. But we need to get some low 40s coming up here in order for the acclimation to really work. The second thing is overall care of the plants. If the plants are in good condition, they have a better chance of surviving. If you have a plant that's not real good, it just looks unhealthy, chances are in a cold that'll finish it off. But so we'll talk about things on my list here, and then we'll go over some of the plants here to tell you which ones can make it and which ones can't. From the looks of it, all these won't make a freeze. So wind is an important factor in determining whether you'll have a problem or not. The cold fronts come out of the northwest and usually have 3 to 4 days to see what's coming. But the wind is the critical factor. If you're going to have a windy night and windy morning, that's less chance that frost will show up and further damage the plants. So you don't want that morning at 6 o'clock in the morning where it just all of a sudden there's no wind, it's dead, and that frost just settles right down on top of things. If you live on the beach side, you can pretty much figure that you're going to have a better chance of things over there because you can figure another 2 to 3 degrees of temperature due to the ocean, proximity to the ocean. And so usually when people ask, I'm not too concerned about the beach side. It's more here west of the river. So the day before the freeze is when you want to start your preparations. So here's the typical temperature range and what damage you might expect to have. 32 to 38 degrees, minimal damage. In the last couple of years where we've had 32 degrees, we've really not seen much damage at all. It goes down to 32 about sunrise, and then it starts warming up. If you had more than a couple of hours at 32 degrees, then you could start to see some damage on some of the plant material. 29 to 32 will kill tender plants. And that could be houseplants, orchids, and some of the more tender ones like alocasias. 25 to 29 degrees, you're going to have widely destructive damage. You'll see hibiscus get killed, not necessarily killed, but they'll drop all their leaves, the stems will turn brown, and chances are you might be able to get it to come back from the base, but maybe not at that kind of temperature. We haven't seen that kind of temperature in a long time, and let's hope we don't get there. So the temperatures usually begin to drop after sunset, and then they start going lower until sunrise. So what to do? The afternoon or the evening before the freeze event, run your sprinklers or water by hand. That will help put a little bit of moisture in the soil to give a little bit of heat to the root zone of the plant material, and that helps considerably. Any tender plants, indoor plants, most of what you see here would be tender. Move them inside or move them in a corner of a fence that comes together, under a big tree, anything where it creates a little microclimate that would help to slow down any potential damage. Or cover the plants with sheets, blankets, towels, or you can purchase frost cloth. And Busy Bee sells it here. Now this is what I used when I was in the nurseries, but we had 50 rolls, 20 feet wide by 150 feet long, because I'm covering crops of 500 plants in a crop. So I need the big ones. And even we had one year, other than the one I spoke of down to 28, we had 28 degrees for a little bit of time, and all the Ixoras underneath the cloth lost their leaves. So even that, but you could figure to get 2 to 3 degrees more protection just by using cloth or blankets or towels. And that certainly makes a help. So what do you do after the freeze event? Leave the cover on the plants until the temperature gets around 40 degrees and higher. And then don't do any fertilizing until the winter is over. You'll see plant damage. You want to figure, okay, I want to fertilize them. I want to get them going. Please wait till we get to the 1st of March before you do any kind of fertilizing. You don't want to encourage new growth that if we happen to have another freeze, it'll just zap that. I use the example of years ago we had 2 coconut palms in our house, and we had one freeze one year that pretty much knocked all the leaves off and damaged the bud. I could see brown spots on the bud, and it struggled for a year to come around. And then the next year we had another freeze event, and that just wiped them out. And I only live about 5 miles off the ocean. So apply root stimulator. Mix it with water, pour it into the soil at the base of the roots, and this helps promote root growth and helpfully turn around some roots that are a little bit unhealthy because of the cold, and that'll make a difference. Check the plants for water needs. Most likely, since you watered the night before, you won't need to water, but be more concerned about doing that as time goes on to keep the plant as healthy as possible. And here's the big one that we always get phone calls about. When people have damage, they call up right away, what do I do? Do I cut these plants back? No, wait for 2 weeks. It's going to take 2 weeks before any signs of damage is going to show up. Real damage. Then you can make an evaluation of what to do in those plants. So delay any pruning until new growth starts to appear, and that could be 2 weeks, possibly even more, depending on the variety of the plant. So signs of plant damage. Like I said, you won't see anything right away. High wind causes leaves to turn brown on edges. The first one that I see having problems is Bougainvillea. And I've seen some lately where we've been down in the low 50s and you get some wind and all the leaves turn brown on the edges or even the whole leaves, and some drop off. And that could happen too in a hurricane. But leaves turn yellow and drop. Hibiscus. One of the first ones to show damage. All the leaves on the inside will turn yellow and drop off. Gardenia's the same. Ixora's the same. So that's the first ones to look for. And then if it starts looking bad and want to make a determination of whether the plant's worth saving or how much damage there is, scratch the stem. And if it's green underneath, you're in good shape. If it's black or brown, then you've got a problem. And that, again, but wait some time before you make any big decisions about what to do. I mean, we've had customers say, well, rip it out and put new ones in. And okay, that's fine. Wilting or small branches. So particularly, on your vegetables, but after a cold, this is going to wilt like it would be dry, but that's going to show a sign of cold damage. Burn-like spots on the flowers. Orchids will typically do that. You'll see spots all over the petals, and that'll show a sign, but orchids really need to be brought inside when the temperature goes into the 40s. And splits in the trunk. Some trees, particularly palm trees, you'll see a split in the trunk because of the moisture content, and it'll just split. Don't see that terribly that often, but sometimes that'll happen. So plants that quickly show damage. Hibiscus, gardenias is another big one, where the leaves will turn yellow and drop off. Croton's leaves will drop. Bougainvillea leaves will drop. Some citrus will show damage, grapefruit being the most hardy of all the citrus trees. Palm trees, like I said about the coconut. Some of the more delicate palms, the Majesty, Chamaedorea palm, those are going to show more damage. The Chinese fan palm's a bit hardier than most of them. Seasonal flowers, indoor plants, and veggies are the ones that are going to show the damage. But if you have the place or the time, move those inside if you can. But the covering is a great tool to use in preventing from cold damage. So let's talk about the different plants. Bougainvillea, we already talked about. The leaves will turn brown on the edges if there's any wind. Ixora, beautiful plants, flower very nicely down here, but you'll find leaves will turn brown and drop from the inside. Hibiscus we already talked about. Philodendron, common plant in the landscape. You'll mostly see spots, but then you'll see after a couple of weeks or so, you'll see the leaves start to turn brown, and then they'll fall off. Crotons we talked about, definitely gonna lose leaves. They can be cut back, but don't be in too big a hurry to do that. This is the Chestnut Diane. Not terribly familiar of how that acts in cold weather. I've just not experienced anything with that. Chinese fan palm should be pretty good. Alocasia, very temperamental. If you can cover that, something you might not want to hear, but might be helpful, is to trim all the leaves off because they're going to get damaged. And then look for the new bud, and this one doesn't have one just yet coming up, and then just wrap the plant. These get tore up in windy situations, and even in hurricanes, they just get beat real bad. I have recommended to people just cut them off and let the new growth come out undamaged, because you're going to cut it off anyways in a hurricane. European fan palm, is very durable. You'll find these growing up in North and Central Florida, even up into the Carolinas. Very slow growing, but makes a beautiful palm. Another philodendron is the Xanadu. Nice low growing, does mass plantings very nicely, but it will show damage with cold weather fairly quickly. Chamaedorea palm, typically an indoor plant. We've used them quite a bit in landscapes, wants shade only. In the sun, they just kind of bleach out. Another philodendron, the monstera, old-fashioned houseplant. Been around for years. So again, a little bit tender. Let's see, spathiphyllum, again, very tender. All of these on the table, very tender, particularly the vegetables. Let's see, orchids. Busy Bee will recommend bringing your orchids in anything under 50 degrees. So that takes a little bit of work. Paul here that does the orchids for Busy Bee, he's got a house, and I'm not sure how he takes care of them all because he's got a lot. And that's about all. It's not terribly an extensive subject to talk about. We talked about the basics, what'll happen and what to do. Yes, ma'am?
If your orchids are tied to a tree, do you wrap it or something? Or?
Yeah, a little towel and wrap it up a little bit. Chances are with the towel it might damage the flowers but protect the plant itself. Oh, don't use plastic. Plastic is not a good idea to protect your plants. It has to be a fabric type material. And also with the fabric material, make sure you get the entire plant covered. You'll see some people that'll just throw it over top of a plant, but the bottom's exposed, the cold temperature can still get in there. Beds of flowers, just put the towel over top of them, and that should be enough unless we get down, you get into 25 degrees to 30. It's just not good. And I remember that some years ago here that we had that, and it's just devastation. Yes, ma'am.
A couple questions for you about the covers. So, when you cover plants, are there some plants that you can allow the covers to touch them, and others that you should not allow the covers to touch? And then, if they're predicting a kind of longer than one-day event, are we concerned about a type of cover that allows or does not allow photosynthesis?
You can allow the cover to touch the plant. If they say there's going to be 2 nights worth, leave the covers on them. Shouldn't be a problem. Shouldn't hurt the plants at all.
Now, I've had some of my neighbors string their Christmas lights for a breeze.
Yeah.
Is that useful or not useful?
Supposedly. I just, you touch a Christmas tree light bulb and it just doesn't seem to be that much heat there. But they do recommend that you can use bulbs. It gives you 1 to 2 degrees, and that can be helpful. And that's typically what happens to a lot of the plants. The cells inside are full of water, and it just explodes in the cells, and that shows up what the damage is. So there's not a lot else to say about it. We've covered the basics of what happens, and we just pray that fortunately it does not happen.